Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to Carol. And thank you so much for accepting our invitation, getting up so early, and coming on this talk show. Welcome to all participants. This is the seventh episode of our SEM talk show, and as we have planned, we plan to have it every fortnight. And last one was on 24th of October, and next one I think because of Diwali festivals we'll have after 3 weeks. So this is going to be an exception, not after 2 weeks, but after 3 weeks. So we choose topics from the survey that we send it to you and your responses. As Nistusha started, the session is recorded and it's made available to you free on our mobile app as well as YouTube channel. So we are putting everyone on listen only mode, but you can submit your questions in the chat box. We will take few questions towards the end, depending on the availability of the time. So let me start. Let me first introduce Carol. So it's my pleasure to introduce Ms. Carol Ptak. Carol is proven thought leader with the goal of transforming the world of manufacturing. I think she's really doing a great and lovely job. As you all know, she and her partner Chad Smith are the creator of this demand-driven methodology that is part of the bigger concept called demand-driven adaptive enterprise. So I must thank her for accepting our invitation and coming to this talk show at 3:30 a.m. her time. And that's really early, very early. The task of introducing her is like introducing the sun to you. But let me try. I'll give a very brief about her. So she earned her MBA from Rochester Institute of Technology and completed her EMPO program at the Stanford University. She started her career with managing daily factory operations. Then she switched to consulting, where she laid her hands on ERP implementation and education and training. She was Apex president for the year 2000, and to date, she remains the only woman Apex president, right, in the history of Apex. She worked for IBM and she was vice president in PeopleSoft also, which is not part of Oracle. And she has worn many hats, I can tell you that. She has authored many books. She was co-author with Ellie Goldratt also. She has taught in business school. She nurtured TOC-ICO, another organization with TOC certification programs. And she is very widely traveled. And I remember she was here for the first time in India in 2015 to do a program on demand driven. And we happened to try this pani puri or puchka, batasha, gupchup, whatever you call it, in Taj, and she really loved it, and that was her maiden trip. So it's difficult for me to list down all her achievements. I think you can Google it. You can go to Demand Driven Institute's website, and you will have a little bit more bio of her. So welcome, Carol, to this talk show.
Thank you, Ravi. I really appreciate the invitation. And as you said, those are great memories when I was there and we had an opportunity to try all those different kind of foods. It was wonderful.
Yeah,
Thanks for having me.
actually, it's our pleasure, in fact. So let's actually quickly begin our talk show. I think demand driven is really something new to Indian businesses. And I think some of them are very familiar, especially some MNCs who are implementing in the Europe or the US. So but the first question which comes to my mind, I think not my mind, in fact, most planners, that how can you plan make to stock? So when we say demand driven, we are expecting a customer order, and make to stock usually don't have a customer order. For example, FMCG. So how can you do a demand-driven planning use on a make-to-stock item where you need customer orders, you need some visibility, and usually you don't have visibility in make-to-stock products?
Thanks, Ravi. Yeah, and actually FMCG is one of the biggest areas in which demand-driven has been implemented because it does fit so well. When we think about customer orders in FMCG, frankly, we just don't have them. So it's very interesting, that it's always, this is the first question that comes up because I say, well, how can I do demand driven? I need a long-term forecast. I need to have customer orders way out into the future. And the reality is that all of our companies today, fast moving consumer goods, make to order, and everything in between, between is we're facing a very volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous time. So what we need to be able to do is sense changes in the marketplace and then adapt our planning to what's actually going on. So how we get this done is that the first step is to design a supply chain that has a capability that's required for your company. So what we do is that we have to take a look at and place decoupling points. Well, why a decoupling point? Well, it's like having a firewall in a building. If you don't have any firewalls in the building, and if you have a fire, you're going to burn the building down. With firewalls, what happens is it slows the fire or contains the fire to a small area. And so when we apply that to a supply chain, we have to have these stopgaps, these firewalls in our supply chain, so that we can replenish these positions of independent. We didn't invent decoupling. It's something that's been in the Apex dictionary for probably 30 years. And we've all known about the strategy of postponement for many, many years. But how do we methodically determine where those decoupling points should be? And then it's replenished. So it's a big difference between trying to project what the customer is going to take versus developing a capability to deliver what the customer really wants. So that's really how it's done. It's the first step is the strategic selection of decoupling points.
Right. So actually, many people, when the term planning comes in, immediately the forecasting comes in. So the question in everybody's mind is, without forecasting, how can you plan? So forecasting and planning is like synonymous to each other.
Absolutely. And this is a really great question, because there's a lot of very nasty discussion out on LinkedIn that says that Demand-Driven Institute has said you never use a forecast, and we've never said that. What we've said is that tying a forecast directly to the release of orders is absolutely devastating, because what we know is we all know the 3 rules of forecasting. Of course, if forecasts are wrong, that the further in the future we try to forecast, the more wrong it is. The more detail we try to forecast, the more wrong it is. Well, unfortunately, our traditional planning systems need information by part number, by date, by SKU. I mean, very detailed. And we don't have enough time to be able to produce things. The customers just simply aren't willing to wait. So what we need to do is we have to use a forecast to set our capability. Let me use an example, Ravi. It's something that hit me. As you know, I travel a lot. I spent some time in India, one of my favorite places to come. And, when I pack, I look at where I'm going. And I had one trip come up a couple of years ago where this finally came to and hit me. Is I was leaving Phoenix, which is my home airport, and I was heading to South Africa. And it was in the middle of February. So I was going down to Johannesburg. And from Johannesburg, I was popping up to Barcelona. And then from Barcelona to Mannheim, from Mannheim to Moscow. Well, when you think about that, look at the forecast. It's the middle of summer in Johannesburg. Well, it's still winter in Barcelona, but it's right on the Mediterranean, so it's sort of nice. Mannheim for that week was supposed to be really sort of nice. In American saying, it was supposed to be about 55 degrees, which is a little chilly, but not bad. I was really quite comfortable with just a wool sport coat when I got there. And well, let's face it, think about February in Moscow. With pretty high certainty, you could project it was probably going to snow. So normally, as Ravi will attest, I travel with a single rollerboard suitcase that I carry on the plane, and I can usually travel 2 weeks. But when you think about taking a trip like Johannesburg, Barcelona, Mannheim, and Moscow, I had to carry 2 suitcases. So I had to check one. And the airlines kept trying to get me to check both, but I wouldn't. I would keep my rollerboard with me. And what was in that rollerboard was the clothes that I needed for the next few days, for the next stop. But was in the bottom of that big suitcase that I had checked was a big, heavy winter coat. Now, I got up about the 3rd day I was in Mannheim, and I looked outside, and it was snowing. There was nothing in the forecast that said it was supposed to snow that day. And so what did I do? Well, I took out my big, heavy coat, my hat, and my gloves, and went off to work. And everybody in Germany, I was just brilliant that I had packed this big, heavy coat. And it's like, I'm going to Moscow. I'm pretty certain I need to use it. Now, if a master schedule, if we tie the forecast directly to the release of orders, I would not have been allowed to pull out my coat until I got to Moscow. But with a demand-driven approach, I position these strategic decoupling points. And when I need them, I use them. So I think that's the best way I can explain it, is that we forecast what we think is going to happen. We prepare for it. But what we do is we actually leverage and use those resources when we need them and not before.
Excellent example. I love it, Carol. I really love it. I think it's you hit directly on the nail by giving the example of forecasting the actual customer orders. So I think that really I think we can even I'm going to use this example even in my future trainings on demand driven. Absolutely. Wonderful example.
Well, and it's
Wonderful.
something that we can all relate to because we've all traveled. And I know, like, Robbie, when you come here to the States, you just know it's always going to be cold.
Yeah.
But it's, we prepare for what we think is going to happen. Now, there's stuff that happens that we've never foreseen. Like a lot of people were surprised by the recent pandemic, and what we ran out of stock. I don't know what, what's going on there in India, but, like our grocery stores ran out of food and meat and produce and all that. And it's been very interesting to watch how fast they're recovering. And now it's very interesting because now we're seeing things on sale that
Absolutely,
we didn't even have available in March. So it's just crazy. It's just crazy.
Yeah. So we've been hearing the story about the US supermarkets and the shelves going empty, and all of a sudden shelves again refilled. So in India, I think situation was not very bad because I think people did not go and stock too much in their houses. So I think, but we hear all the stories of the US, about toilet tissues and about sanitizers, and I mean sanitizers and masks. We had problem here also, especially sanitizers and masks. Yeah. So I think one more question we have. We are talking about decoupling points. At decoupling points, we are talking about having so much inventory. That is what we call as buffers. So, when we are going to have so many buffers at so many places, how can we say that, DDMRP is going to reduce inventory and the inventories are going to be low? How can we say that? Won't it be more inventory?
Well, that's a very common question because people say, well, now you've strategically positioned this inventory, and based on its lead time and its average daily usage and minimum order quantities, we're going to make sure that we always keep that inventory there. Yeah, because let's go back, Robbie, to what inventory really is. There's always a good conversation. You get into a conversation with a lot of lean people, and they say, well, inventory really should be on the liability side of the balance sheet in the company. But the reality is inventory is an asset. It always has been an asset. We account for it financially as an asset. And what we need to do is treat it as an asset. And just like any other asset, we should invest in it when it's going to increase our return on that investment. There's an interesting curve because if we think about it, I can have too little inventory. And too little inventory is where I have shortages. And I can also have too much inventory, and that's, of course, where I have excess and obsolete. And somewhere between too little and too much is just right. Well, how do I measure just right? Well, that's where I've maximized my return on investment. So we need to consider inventory as an asset. Now, Ddmrp strategically positions that inventory, but it's there for a reason. Every piece of inventory that's there is strategically there for a reason because it increases return on investment. If it doesn't increase ROI, then it shouldn't be there. So as we look at the total inventory, and you can look out at our case studies on the website, typically a company that converts to strategically placed inventory reduces total inventory by about a third to a half. We've seen some companies larger than that, but typically it's a third to the half. And the reason is because now no longer is inventory just the result of the process. It's really taken its rightful role as being a strategic asset that needs to be actively managed. In a traditional planning process using MRP, in every company that's using traditional MRP, what you discover is you always have too much of the wrong stuff. You have too little of the right stuff. And overall, we have too much stuff. And that is unavoidable. And it's because of what we were talking about earlier, is tying that forecast directly to the order release. We're releasing things that the customer's not demanding and not releasing the things the customer should be demanding. And every time we run MRP, we oscillate from too much to too little, little to too much. Any planner that's been out there more than a couple months, when they get a weird order that comes in, they'll say, yeah, you know what, I'm going to wait for the next planning run because I don't think that's right. And the more real time we try to get with material planning, the worse the situation gets. So really, the total inventory, when we manage it as a strategic asset, typically is about a third to about a half less. The fast-moving consumer goods that you mentioned earlier, they tend to maybe get up a little higher than that. Process industry tends to be on the lower side. So yeah, that's pretty typical.
So I think, one of the evidence that we teach in DDMRP and why MRP really fails, the evidence is use of Excels. And I think all planners who are here on this talk show would strongly agree that, we are using Excels, and we are using Excels not to upload and download data, but we are using Excels to do our own calculations, which are different than what the system is giving us. So, but one question which comes up into everyone's mind is, how can you be sure that DDMRP is going to work very perfectly and there's no Excels will be required in the future to do planning? So, have you seen some evidence?
Well, I mean, here's the best. Yeah, absolutely. Well, here's the best part is that DDMRP doesn't need to be perfect to work. I think that's probably the biggest difference. One of the things we always teach in Apex is that our bills of materials have to be 100% accurate, and our routings have to be 100% accurate, and our demand has to be 100% accurate, and it can't change because what we recognize that MRP makes everything dependent. So any change in the parent makes changes in all the components, and that all of our inventory record accuracy has to be 100% perfect. And what we all understand as planners, we're living in a perfect world. We're living in a world with bad inventory data and bad demand forecast and bad bills of materials, and our routings are inaccurate. So we're sort of dealing with this mess, and we're trying to apply rules and tools that are all based on the premise that we have perfection. So with DDMRP, it's just got to be roughly right. And we like to say roughly right is better than precisely wrong. Honestly, Ravi, in a lot of early implementations, planners, after they take the demand-driven planner course, will go back and they'll change their Excel spreadsheets and put in the new formulas for demand-driven. And they do that because they go, this just makes sense, and I don't want to live with the chaos anymore.
Okay.
But as a company starts to evolve from those early proof of concept pilots, then they will bring in a DDMRP compliant software. And the reason that planners don't use Excel is because the software, the DDMRP compliant software, matches their intuition. They're saying this makes sense, and I can validate what the software is telling me without spending hours and hours and hours doing it. So we see in companies like Shell Lubricants, they're running off of a single instance of their ERP system, and the planners love it because what they're seeing makes sense. We don't do Excel because we like Excels. We're trying to get something that makes sense to us.
So have planners come back and told you that their life has become simple, their life has become the miserable time that they have with planning has reduced, they're happy, they're going back home early? Have you heard such comments like that?
Oh, around the world, and I've also heard it from chief executives as well, because there's a real shortage of effective and skilled supply chain professionals worldwide. And so we want to keep the ones that we have. And I had an opportunity to meet a young, he's Ecuadorian, he's currently living in Holland, and he wrote a white paper a long time ago. It's on our website. It's called The Fourth Benefit of DDMRP. We always talk about reduced lead times, improved on time in full, and reduced inventories. And he said the fourth benefit is that, it's the people question. It's the stress reduction. And it's because we're not asking our planners to do what I call stupid stuff. We're not asking them to do these crazy things that we all get accustomed to, and that just drives us crazy. Because every time MRP reruns, we get a different answer. And because DDMRP plans by ranges, now planners are getting relevant information, and they're actually able to do their jobs better.
I ran into the CEO of a French company that his people had done DDMRP, and he says, Carol, I got to tell you, he says, our inventory turns have gone up and our personnel turns have gone way down. And I said, well, that's because of you. And he was very proud. I said, because you're not asking your people to do stupid stuff anymore, so they're not leaving. And he says, only you can grab a negative from a positive comment. And I said, well, this is what we do with our planners. We make them do crazy things. And it was a really, it's a cause of stress because we put our planners in this position of what's called the double bind. No matter what they do, they're wrong. Either finance is after them because they got too much inventory, or manufacturing is after them because they got shortages. And the problem is that they got both at the same time.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. I think planners are going to love this. So I have one more question on the evidence, that we talked about. One of the evidence we talked about is, return on assets that is continuously declining over a number of years. So some of the implementation that have been happened, worldwide on Ddmrp, have you seen increase in ROA, the return on assets?
Some of them a factor of 10. It's very interesting. Deloitte University Press track the return on assets in the United States economy, and it was like 4.1% in 1965, and by 2008 we were down to 0.9. And what's interesting is during that same period, the productivity of labor doubled here in the United States. I mean, that's shameful. Companies didn't all go bankrupt because back in 2008 we were told that that our new growth rate, our new normal, was going to be a GDP of about 1%. Of course, the last 4 years dramatically changed that, and we've seen lots of shifts here in the American economy. And what's interesting is if you look at the companies that have implemented, and I would encourage your listeners to go out to demanddriveninstitute.com and click on the case studies, because I think that's really where the proof is show me a company that looks like me, that's in an industry like me, and what happened to the ROI? What happened to the inventory? There's some aggregate numbers that were done by a survey by the Camelot Consulting Group out of Germany, and it shows the changes by industry, by companies, and I think it's a very interesting story. We've seen revenue go up, ROI go up dramatically, inventories come down, lead times come down, and I think the most rewarding thing is as the pandemic started to set in, the phone calls that we got of companies saying our buffers are holding, that we're able to deliver to our market, or stories like Shell Lubricants when their tanker farm blew up in Houston, and they never had a single shortage at the retail level here across the United States. Here I was, I'm one state away from Houston, and I didn't even know the tanker farm was on fire. And they said it was because we had the visibility that we needed to put the inventory in the right place. So yeah, lots of great case studies, lots of increased ROI. I look forward to probably a few years ahead of us that we'll be able to do some more aggregate studies on that. But yeah, lots and lots of case studies by industry. So I would encourage your listeners to go take a look at the DDI website and look at a company that compares to yours and see what kind of results, because all those case studies are presented by executives from that company. They're not presented by a software supplier or a consulting company. It's the person from the company saying, this is what we did, this is why we did it, here's the results we got, here's the mistakes we made. And I think that's an important part to say, if we had it to do over again, what would we do different?
Hello?
Yeah, I'm here. Hello?
Yeah, Carol. Yeah, actually, your voice was breaking.
Oh, okay. Sorry. That's why I have no video on. I know some people would like to have video, but I live in a very remote area of Arizona, not just rural. It's incredibly remote. We actually live totally off the grid. So what that means is that electricity, water, sewer, mail delivery, police protection, we're not connected to any of that. So my Wi-Fi comes to me by satellite, and sometimes that satellite does give a little hiccup.
Yeah, you live in a crazy place, I can tell you that.
I do indeed. I do indeed.
Yeah. So I think you answered this question, but let me ask one question, the same question again. Data discipline is one of the big issue, I think, when we run MRP and any planning system. And typically there are two issues out there: timeliness and accuracy of data. So people may not enter the data accurately. It may be because of data entry errors. It may be because of lack of transaction posting. It may not be timely also. People may not enter the data on the same day, or maybe not immediately, maybe after a delay. So what data discipline is really required in DDMRP environment?
Well, my recommendation always, Ravi, is that, we follow the same rules. Data should be timely, data should be accurate, but under demand-driven environment, if it's not, it's much less devastating. Because remember, back to MRP assumes that everything is accurate, and we know that is never the case. Ddmrp just treats data inaccuracy and poor data discipline as another source of variability. And the nice part of the demand-driven model is that it tends to show up where that data inaccuracy is more quickly, so that you can address it with your continuous improvement programs. Because not everything is equal in its importance to be accurate. We always want to be as accurate as we possibly can, but certain areas are going to be more important than other areas. So it's not quite as devastating as it is under MRP. It's just treated as another source of variability.
Oh, good. So that's a very, very good news. In fact, it's a very, very good news. So one question I have is, Indian professionals usually, they follow mostly what goes on in the US. We follow very closely the skill sets that are required, the processes, the best practices, and so on. So I think why Europe is more upbeat on DDMRP than in the US?
Well, I think we got to look at two things. Is that when we think about MRP was invented here in the US. It was invented in the Midwest part of the United States. That's the reason the APEX organization was founded in 1956. The book was written here in the United States. The software industry started here in the United States. So that's the heritage. The belief here in the United States is if only we can do things faster, then it will be better. The reality is the Europeans are the ones that actually codified and commercialized advanced planning systems. So APS came off of work that was done by Ellie Goldratt, you mentioned earlier, but it was really the software and the mathematics behind APS was actually done in Germany, of course. And so in Europe, they have a much bigger use of advanced planning systems than what we have here in the States. And what they've discovered is that the faster they get, the more precise they attempt to get in planning, the worse the results are. So Europe actually has realized the fallacy of traditional planning much quicker than the Americans, because they are much more advanced in their use of advanced planning tools than the Americans are. So they are looking at it and going, this isn't working. There's got to be something else out there. And then it was because of the French Association for Supply Chain is where we got our first break in Europe and France. Then the results were so compelling, it started to go across Europe. So France is actually the #1 country for the implementation of demand-driven still today in the world. And of course, if France is #1, I'd say it'd be interesting to find out what your listeners would think would be #2. But I'll tell them, France is #1 worldwide for demand-driven, and the #2 country in the world is Colombia. And that's because of the theory of constraints group that are down there, that they'd already understood about buffer, but they were seeing that their results were flattening out. They weren't on that nice improvement curve. And so they came over to demand-driven. And then third country in the world is Mexico, believe it or not. So yeah, #1 is France, #2 Colombia, and #3 Mexico. And Mexico, because of the APEX association there, a lot of the APEX guys there have really embraced the concepts of demand-driven, and Mexico has been growing very, very quickly. And so it's been really interesting to watch. And North America is woefully behind.
That's a new knowledge for me. Colombia and Mexico. I thought second would be Germany. Yep. Okay, but
yeah, we never really could break the German market until we had an SAP solution. And Camelot brought the first SAP solution to market only it's probably about 3 or 4 years ago. And now, of course, SAP itself is DDMRP compliant in both its S4 and IVP software, and they're actually DDSNOP compliant, or they're DDOM compliant and DDSNOP compliant on their IVP solution. So the German market was a tough one until we had an SAP enter.
So actually, which type of businesses, benefit the most, and which type of business benefit the least, and what is required to make it a success?
Well, I can tell you right now, any company that has little variability, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity is going to benefit from demand driven. The very first PhD research done on the subject was done out of South Korea. And that's exactly the research that was done, is that where would DDMRP be effective and how does it compare head on head with MRP? And so if you don't have any variability or volatility, MRP will outperform DDMRP every day. So if you're living in a perfect world with no upset, no variability, then DDMRP won't work. Conversely, the more variability you have, the more volatility you have, the better demand-driven works for you, because that's what it was designed for. Demand-driven was designed from the beginning based on the science of complex adaptive systems, understanding that supply chains are complex adaptive systems and that they're multi-echelon entities with extreme variability, and that's what it was designed for. So the more of that you have, the better demand-driven works. And the second part of your question, what's required to make it a success? It's the first step, Ravi, that is absolutely the most difficult, which is changing how you think. Shifting from the idea that you manage for cost to managing for flow. And when companies and people can shift their brains from managing for cost to managing for flow, then implementations go very, very quickly.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So now I think I'll go into another segment about your personal career, about personal journey from your school education. So how did you end up being here from your school, after your school?
Oh gosh, that's a funny story. Actually, my undergraduate education is in biology. I worked for a biological supply company out of college. Actually, what I did is I was manager of a living materials department. So everything that I studied in college, I now had to keep healthy, alive, and reproducing. We actually, here's your trivia point today. If you've ever watched the Edward G. Robinson movie Creepshow, it's a horror movie and it's got tons of cockroaches in it. 15,000 cockroaches actually came out of my department. We actually had to count all those cockroaches and deliver them to the movie studio. So that was the start of my career. It was in biology. Ended up in a biologicals manufacturing company. Yeah, I know, stop laughing. And what I discovered is that I was really interested in the manufacturing more than I was in the biology, because I was in the medical device field by this point. And I had a great mentor. So many of us do in our careers. And she told me, go find your professional society and get involved. Not just join, but get involved. And so that's when I found APIX, at the time, the American Production Inventory Control Society. And I thought, remember, I've got a degree in biology. I'm thinking production inventory control, that's kind of what I'm doing. So I think I'll join. And I volunteered for the board of directors. And everything that happened after that, I can really tie back to the associates that I've made. Well, like you in APIX, you and I have known each other how many years?
I don't know. I don't even remember. Yeah.
And lots and lots of years. So, it was one of the questions that we were asked too, is how did demand driven get such a fast start? And I said, well, when you have a strong network, like we had, I've been a member of APIX for 40 years, you get to know lots of great people like yourself, and you reach out to the people you know. And, when you have your professional credibility, people will then listen to you. So, so I ended up in manufacturing, enjoyed the APIX organization, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Yeah, right. So I would like you to tell me about your Ddmrp journey also. I remember, Chad and Eric Bush invited me and Shashi over dinner during this 2012 APIX conference in Denver. I also remember Chad explaining me the whole Ddmrp concept over the dinner. And that was very new to me. And that time I may not have understood maybe half of it. So I didn't know what Chad was exactly talking about. Yeah. And I also remember that.
Actually, it's funny that that 2012 conference, that is the first time we ever taught a DDP class in the United States. We had already done several overseas in Europe. That was the first one we did that was actually in the US.
So can you please talk about your Ddmrp journey? Where did it start and where you are currently at?
Well, again, an interesting story. Ddmrp, a lot of people say it's brand new. Well, it's sort of not. We've been working on it close to 20 years. Ddmrp actually started back as demand-driven manufacturing, and that term was a PeopleSoft term. I was hired by PeopleSoft in 2003 to create the strategy for manufacturing, distribution, and retail. And it was my boss and I. We were very late one night yelling at each other, which we typically did, trying to figure out what would be our strategy for manufacturing. And I don't remember what he said to me, but I know he made me very angry. And I slammed my fist on the desk and I said, no, darn it, Bill, it's not that. It is demand-driven manufacturing. And we looked at each other and he goes, I think that's it. And we wrote it on the board and he says, why don't you head back to the hotel and let's look at it in the morning. The reality is that PeopleSoft spent millions of dollars marketing the term demand-driven manufacturing. We didn't have a clue how to do it. I knew it was something to do with supply chain design because we went out and we purchased the assets of JCIT, the John Costanza Institute of Technology. So we purchased the demand flow technology software, and then we bought JD Edwards, and then we embedded demand flow into JD Edwards. So we knew it had something to do with design because demand flow had a great idea of how to do lean design. We knew it had something to do with metrics. I brought Deborah Smith in to PeopleSoft to help us with that. We knew it had something to do with sales and operations planning. I saw one of the listeners has posed a question about Snlp, and I really want to get to that. So we brought in Dick Ling. Now, Dick is the father of Snlp. It's one of the nice things when you're working for a very large software company and you're a vice president and you get lots of money, to bring in these people from all over the world and, the best in their industry. So that's where it started. Now, what happened was, as you all know, and as you said in the introduction, Oracle took PeopleSoft over in a hostile takeover in 2005, and everything that was demand driven. Here's the trivia: we had built into JD Edwards, and we were due for the third major release of JD Edwards in 2004, and the release date was Tuesday. And I got the news on Monday that we had lost the hostile take. So that was one of the most gut-wrenching times of my career. Here, everything that I knew about demand driven was to be released the next day, and we lost the hostile takeover. So it was never released. So that was 2004. I was released, shall we say, out of Oracle in early 2005. It was never an employee of Oracle, and I went to go to the university. And so I figured, what the heck? If I can't change the world through software, I would change it through students. So I was at the university. I was teaching. I was the executive in residence at Pacific Lutheran University. And I got a call from an old friend. And I had watched her son grow up. And I knew her son. I was watching him grow up from the time he was a young teenager. He was very involved in the theory of constraints world. And he called me up and he said, we need somebody that understands formal planning and lean and theory of constraints and understand software. And well, you know what? You're close. I was living in Western Washington at the time. So Chad Smith and Deborah Smith came over to the university, and he showed me what they did with their software. They had been working with a very large company, multinational company, multi-echelon, big engineer-to-order company. And they said, we needed to figure out how to handle this across the supply chain. And I remember this conversation like it was yesterday. And I looked at Chad and I said, you do realize you violated most rules of formal planning. And he said, yeah, I know, but it works. And I said, well, you know why it works? And he said, why? And I said, because you've solved the bullwhip effect. And he said, well, yeah, we know that, but so what? I said, no, you don't understand. The bullwhip effect is the holy grail. That's what's been dogging all of us for the last 70 years. And so that was 2007. And that's when Chad and I said, I understand the problem. Chad and his team had come up with the breakthrough idea that was the solution. And so Chad and I started writing together, and we wrote our first white paper called Beyond MRP. And we thought it was pretty good. So the only way you know if something's good is that you have to open it up to your peers. So we sent it to Apex. And the result that we got back, Apex got back to us within a week, which I was shocked. Because as you mentioned, I was Apex president in 2000, and I could never get anything published in the Apex magazine. And Apex came back within a week, and they said, can you cut it down to about 800 words? And we said, sure. And so we did, and we signed, and they published it in a magazine. And the magazine came out, and I still have copies of it today. And it was a weaving loom on the front cover. And the title on this issue was called Brilliant Vision. And we thought, that's a really good issue to be in. And much to our surprise, when we opened the issue, the Brilliant Vision was referring to our idea about the earliest days of demand driven. So that's where it all started. So it was basically, you know, just we talked about earlier, it's a strong network and knowing who to go to when you think you got something new. And then I went in 2011, came and spoke at the Kansas City conference, and that's the first time we actually presented it in front of an audience.
Great, wonderful. So, what kind of education or training helped you in, shaping up this Ddmrp and your career?
I think the biggest thing for me, and I think this probably comes as a surprise, is learning systemic thinking process tools. I had my bachelor's degree in biology. I had my master's in manufacturing materials management by this point. I was CPIM certified, CFPIM certified, CIRM certified. But where my career really broke open is when I went to the Goldwright Institute and I learned the thinking processes. I think we are woefully inadequate at the university level that we don't teach our students how to think. It was one of the most rewarding things that I did when I was at the university. And I think because of those systemic thinking process tools is the reason why I was able to recognize when Chad came that day to the university that that was indeed the breakthrough idea that I was missing that enabled demand driven.
Wow.
And so the entire body of knowledge, the entire demand driven body of knowledge is actually put together using systemic thinking tools. There's a effect, cause, effect, systemic logic behind everything that we did. Nothing that we put in demand driven we did because we thought a great idea and we had some brilliant breakthrough thought. We sat up on top of a mountain and we were hit by lightning. It's not something that's that is a miracle. We're not brilliant people. We built on and we stood on the shoulders of giants, but you can do that when you can think systemically. So I think that's the one thing that I did, and it's where my career really took a shift from. I was had a pretty good career going, but I learned systemic thinking and my career just exploded. That was really the pivot point in my professional career.
I'm sure it's a great input to all the listeners, so how to go about. Do you have any other also career advice for supply chain professionals in this VUCA world for the career growth?
I think absolutely. Get involved with your professional society. I mean, it's called ASCM now. Get involved, create that strong network, surround yourself with mentors and people in your life that are professionals in your area. Too often what we do is we stay so focused on our job that we forget that our job is our job, that each of us individually is a brand, and we need to market that brand and we need to develop that brand. And you do that. And that's why I was so happy when you asked me to be on this talk show. This kind of networking is so critically important that, as you said earlier, for the listeners that have just joined, it's 3:30. Well, now it's about 4:15 in the morning here in Arizona. And it was like I jumped at the chance. There was even no discussion about changing the time to some kind of later time, because this is just so important for the listeners to understand that, surround yourself with people like KnoWerX, that you are tapped into this new knowledge that's coming your way.
Thanks so much, Carol. Thank you so much. So I think we have some questions from listeners. I think I hand over to Nistush, so he can probably ask you all the questions which listeners have typed in.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for such a wonderful session, Carol, and I'm sure the learners have learned a lot. So I'll take, there are many questions, I would say, from the participants. Let me just start with the first question from Mr. Bharat Jain. So he says that, do you think when we talk about SNOP, will it be good to include demand-driven planning, or SNOP can be demand-driven, and how?
Well, that's a great question, Mr. Jen, because demand-driven is SNLP. What we realized is that we wrote the very first book on demand-driven in 2011, and that was the book on Orlick Ddmrp. It was the third edition. Very quickly after that, we wrote a book called Ddmrp, just a book about the methodology. And honestly, we sort of thought, well, we're done. Okay, it's obvious. The rest of it's obvious. And very clearly in the classes we were teaching, the questions that we got were about SNOP and how demand-driven tied to SNOP. And Chad and I are like, well, it's obvious. Well, it wasn't obvious. So what we did was we reached out to Dick Ling. Dick is the father of SNOP. He's the guy that invented it. We got him out of retirement. Dick is in his late 80s. And he came out and we started to work together with Dick. And what he realized is that demand-driven now enabled his original vision for SNOP. SNOP was never intended to be supply-demand balancing. What is taught today as SNOP is really a massive distortion
of what Dick intended SNOP to be. SNOP is management's handle on the business. We should be able to evaluate different scenarios, understand the impact of the scenarios, and SNOP is the process by which management handles the business. So what we've done is we've developed something called the demand-driven adaptive enterprise model. And there's three pieces. There's the operational side, which Ddmrp is the heartbeat inside of that. There's a tactical planning, because today in traditional planning, tactical and operational planning is sort of mushed together, and we use the master production schedule to manage both. But in the demand-driven adaptive enterprise model, tactical planning is separate. It's called DDSNOP, demand-driven sales and operations planning. And if you think about it, to go back to the earlier story, that's like, okay, what do I got to put in my suitcase? How do I plan tactically? What am I going to put in my suitcase? And then strategic sales and operations planning is what we call adaptive SNOP. And we're working on that book right now. And that starts at a time frame that is a full cumulative lead time into the future, and then goes out to where cost and capacity becomes variable. That's where you start to talk about, okay, what suitcase do I need to take? You know, where do I go buy a suitcase? What processes do I need? What is my strategy? How do I rationalize my operational strategy with my financial strategy, with my go-to-market strategy? Am I going to near source? Am I going to go to China? Am I going to go to Mexico? You know, what is my strategy for my company? And then understanding those different scenarios that I evaluate, I need to understand what the consequences are of those choices. And today we don't have that bi-directional capability to take strategy to operations and operations to strategy. There's sort of this big leap in the middle that's missing. And that's why Dick calls DDSNOP the missing link, because now we have a capability to establish from a range strategically to a range of capability operationally. And it's very exciting. That's why I'm very excited to be working on this book. We were hoping to have it out earlier this year, but as we all know, the pandemic hit, which shifted a lot of priorities. But we're working on it, and we expect that to be out right after the first year. So great question. SNOP, critical, absolutely critical. We realized that demand-driven was really just the starting point to an effective SNOP process.
That's a great answer. Thank you so much. So the next question is from Mr. Sandeep Kumar. In DDMRP concept, how can we ensure long lead time RM parts availability where we have huge variability in demand, whereas customers are very aggressive to get products soon?
Great question, Sandeep. You've just taken me back to the 6 reasons why we would put in decoupling inventory. One is customer tolerance time. In other words, how long is the customer willing to wait? If the customer is willing to wait a week, and we have long lead time parts that are 3 months, we only have one choice. We have to strategically stock those raw materials. You know, the second question that we ask when we strategically stock parts is, what's our market potential lead time? If I can get it out there faster, you know, can I get more market share or can I get more margin? Another good reason to stock parts. A third is what we call the inventory leverage position. If I have components, and this is typical, when I see long lead time raw material parts, typically these parts are used in multiple parents, which means that the decision to invest in stocking them really generates good return on investment because they can be used in multiple places. And smart engineering departments will try to standardize on raw materials so that we can do just that. So when I'm in this kind of a system, that's where we definitely want to look at if a strategic buffer, a strategic stocking position generates the return on investment necessary to put those parts into inventory. And then we can convert to the finished product as quickly as possible through our own operation. So very good question. You just hit 3 of the 6 reasons why we would strategically stock component materials. And also is too, by the way, as we look at different scenarios of evaluating different suppliers, the cheapest supplier is not necessarily the best supplier. If that causes us to carry a lot more inventory, sometimes a little more expensive supplier that's closer might be overall better for our ROI than a cheaper supplier that's further away.
Got it. Thanks a lot. So the next question is from Mr. Shoaib Ahmed. How Ddmrp will be useful for SAP professionals working in various roles of SAP or on SAP as users? This question is from career perspective as well, he says.
All right, Shoaib, great question. And I want to make sure everybody understands that I'm not endorsing one software over another, but I will let you know that I personally taught the demand-driven planner class to the SAP development team in Germany. We've been working very closely with SAP for, about 10 years now. And when Camelot brought out the SAP solution, that sort of woke up the German giant itself. And SAP itself has dramatically invested in demand-driven. So if the German giant SAP is investing in demand-driven, then that means as your career perspective, it would behoove you to get a demand-driven education as well. As I mentioned, both IBP and S4 have Ddmrp embedded. It is native in the code. They have written it. They have put demand-driven on every roadmap. They have developed both the demand-driven MRP module, the demand-driven operating model, where they support it with demand-driven scheduling, demand-driven SNOP. They have brought to full force all the technology that's now possible of artificial intelligence, machine learning for adapting the demand-driven operating model. So if I was somebody involved in SAP, boy, I would be making sure that I would get a demand-driven planner education. I would be getting certified DDPP. I would be getting the demand-driven leader education so that I understand how the whole demand-driven operating model is put together. Because you're going to see that coming up very quickly we've seen it already. I get lots of calls all the time. We're looking for certified people. We're looking for people that have demand-driven skills. And there's a scarcity, obviously, worldwide. So from a career perspective, I would be pursuing that education and getting certified in that because SAP has put this on their roadmap. It is a major source of investment. Because think about it. What's the technology? What's the science underneath machine learning and artificial intelligence? Well, it's complex adaptive systems. It's the same science that's underneath demand-driven. So it's a perfect marriage because the closer you run demand-driven to real time, the more stable it becomes. And that's what SAP has invested in their new platform, and their IBP platform is what? Real time. Right? And we've been working very closely with them about, matter of fact, a couple of the guys at SAP got actually an early release of the SNOP book because they all have very strong SNOP backgrounds. So yeah, there's actually a book that just was written out of India about SAP and demand-driven. So from my career perspective, I would say go get yourself an education and get certified. You're going to need it, and that's going to be, future career.
Very well. So there's a follow-up question, like right when you started, you do not endorse any one software. So there's a question from Mr. Shiva Kumar. He says, are any other ERP platform like SAP uses Ddmrp, example, Oracle?
Oracle, definitely not. And that's because Oracle, remember where they are based out of. They're American. All right, and the Americans are really well behind the scenes. So if you look at companies like QAD, JD Edwards, SAP, they are all Ddmrp compliant. The other thing that's been happening is for the software, the ERP software that's not compliant, there's actually what we call plugins that operate like an APS that plug into an ERP backbone, which pulls the data out and then manipulates it so that you get the Ddmrp software without having to change out your ERP backbone. And the oldest one of those would be demand-driven technology, the B2Ys, WA. So there's a lot of those around the world. The only thing that Oracle does have is NetSuite, and NetSuite is Ddmrp compliant. And that was done before Oracle bought them. So it'll be interesting to see what Oracle does with them. But Oracle as the software itself, no. Remember, they're American. So they've had a couple chats with us, but they still haven't wrapped their brains around that difference between managing for cost or managing for flow. The Germans really embraced it because they could see it addressed the issues in advanced planning, that the more precise and the more real time you tried to get, the worse results you got. And what they saw is now with demand driven, SAP can really generate, and what they were seeing and what we're seeing around the world is companies are implementing demand driven as part of their upgrade to S4HANA because they can generate the return on investment to pay for the upgrade during the upgrade when they implement the demand driven. As I shared with you earlier, the Shell lubricant runs on a single instance of SAP.
All right, got it. So I think that was the last question. We do not have any further questions from here. So let me just hand over to.
I am going to ask one more question to Carol. So what is the future? What are your plans in the near future about demand-driven MRP?
All right. Well, first thing is demand-driven MRP. The near future is to help people understand that Ddmrp is just the first step. It's not the destination. It's a very well understood, elegantly simple first step into transforming your company into becoming an adaptive enterprise. So that's really our big push. What's in our queue right now is we're working on the sales and operations planning book, which we expect to be out early next year. We're also working on the 4th edition of Orlicky's MRP, and then I think we've got one more book we'll write next year, and that'll be about how to manage a demand-driven operating model. And then I think that's it for books. I think then we finally have codified the body of knowledge, and then we look for things to start to grow. We're excited about the activity that we saw there in India. I mean, India was our #1 during the pandemic, had more people educated in demand driven than any other country around the world, which was phenomenal. I mean, it just shocked everybody. They're like, India? And it's like, yep, the Indians are just doing an awesome job. So we're excited about the implementations and actually with the pandemic, it's brought a lot of people to demand driven because they're saying, how do I handle this variability and volatility that we're seeing, and my current processes aren't working? There's got to be something else out there. So we've actually seen a great deal of growth in some of our programs during the pandemic because people are realizing that what they're doing isn't working, didn't work before, and to continue to do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result. Well, I mean, that's the definition of insanity. So the future is very bright indeed. We should have all the books written, the body of knowledge fully codified by mid-year next year. And then we're excited to see the implementations grow. So it's exciting. I'm hoping to get back out on the road
So I would agree.
Everybody again.
I would agree with you, Carol. I mean, I have seen in pandemic, knowingly, non-knowingly, whether they knew Ddmrp or they did not know Ddmrp, but they have followed the same process what Ddmrp does. I mean, similar process, not really the same, because they have kept the forecast aside, and they looked into day-to-day sale, and that is how they reacted. Yep. So it's very similar to what Ddmrp does. So I think there's one last question.
We've been working on this problem a long time, Robbie. I mean,
yeah.
back to the days where you and I both had, no gray in our hair. We've been working on this a long time. So lots of people have been doing lots of things that are incorporated in the demand-driven body of knowledge, but now we have a full suite understanding from strategy to operations and all that. Yeah, and I just saw that question pop up too about is DDMRP limited to manufacturing only? Oh, no. This is great. The largest retailers in Colombia are retail. Are demand driven. There's a retailer down in South Africa that's actually an e-tailer, an online that's using demand driven. Huge implementations in distribution. Shell Lubricants being one of the largest out there. And also too, there's been some interesting applications of demand driven even in the banking industry. Because if you think about the banking industry, think about cash machines. Well, what's a cash machine? Well, that's inventory. How much cash do I put there? And I don't want too much. I don't want too little. I don't want a shortage. I don't want to have too much. So in South Africa, Capitec Bank has actually been working on that. So yeah, the application is really across the board. But its core, we designed it for manufacturing, retail, distribution, because that's a multi-echelon supply chain. And what's interesting is the more of those links that we connect together that are demand driven, then each of the links benefits again. And that's why, we're so excited about the technology that's available today. And, and really what we've got, Ravi, it's an exciting time to be in supply chain, I think. That's why I was so happy to be invited to your show. We've never had more need with all the volatility that we're facing, and it doesn't promise to get better anytime soon. This is the new normal. I love when people say, well, when we get back to normal. No, this is it. So get used to it. We've never had a methodology as well understood. It's codified. We understand how it works. We've got implementations around the world and companies from retailers to pure engineer to order and everything in between. We have the technology. We've got the world's largest software companies that have built the software. We have the world's largest consulting companies, companies like Accenture and PricewaterhouseCoopers. Tata has been educated in demand driven, but Accenture and PwC are both affiliates of Demand Driven Institute. So we've got the technology, we have the methodology, we've got the consulting support needs. So there's no reason to wait. This isn't new that you're going to, we did a class for a very large consumer products company last week. And I said, I'd like to say you guys are the first ones to walk this road, but this road is pretty well paved. It's now, sort of a four lane paved highway and not the cow path anymore. So it's exciting time.
Thank you so much, Carol. So I don't think we have much time left for more question and answers.
We have just one small question, if we can include that. Is it possible, Carol?
Yeah, Nistush, go ahead. Yeah, Nistush, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. Of course.
So it's from Mr. Ram. He asked how to practice DDP knowledge if company has not adopted the process.
Well, I've seen lots of planners do this. What they do is they take the class and then they go back and they just change their spreadsheet and they just plan differently, even if the company has not gone down the road. We've actually seen that in several companies because we've had companies come to the education and say, we wanted to find out what this guy's been doing. He solved problems that we've never been able to solve before. Because let's face it, your manager doesn't know what's in your spreadsheet anyway. So planners, remember, always affect what you can control. And your boss doesn't know what's in your spreadsheet anyway. So we've actually seen planners do that where they've changed their Excel spreadsheet and they get to go home and be with their family at night and on the weekends and return to some kind of normal life while all the planners around them are pulling their hair out. So yeah, we've actually seen that happen. But usually somebody catches on pretty quick to how come you're so calm, and then companies will start down the demand-driven route. Obviously it's easier and faster if it comes from the top. There's a very large semiconductor company that the CEO said, you're going to do this. And then I know they put me on an airplane and I had to do a roadshow to buy in the top 200 managers in the company that, yes, you are going to do this and this is why. And your life is going to be better. So it can go either way.
Great. Thank you so much, Carol. So I think so all the questions that we have. Ravi, so would you like to add anything?
No, you just go ahead. I think
No.
and give a vote of thanks to all the to
Sure.
Carol also
So
and all the participants also, please.
sure. Thank you so much, Carol, for joining in and making such an interactive and a nice learning session. It's really, really early morning there, and your commitment for the supply chain community is really amazing. So thank you so much once again for joining in. Thank you so much, Ravi sir, for being an amazing host again and doing this talk show. To further interact with the speakers, all the participants, you can please click on the link that I have shared in the chat box. Thank you everyone for joining in for the show. I hope you learned a lot. If you want to stay connected with the supply chain community, kindly follow KnoWerX on all the social media pages. The links have been shared. You can download our app also. If you want to suggest any topic or if you want to request yourself as a speaker, you can always message us, get in touch with us. The next talk show will not be after 2 weeks, but it'll be after 3 weeks due to the Diwali festival. So it will be on the 28th of November at 4 p.m. on the same link, and it will be on e-commerce supply chain, which was planned for this episode, but it will be happening on the next episode. So thank you once again, everyone, for joining in. Have a great holidays. Happy Diwali to everyone. Take care. Goodbye. Have a great weekend ahead.
Have a nice weekend.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Natasha.
Thank you.
Happy Diwali to everybody.
Thank you. Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you.